The first thing I saw when I woke up was the fluorescent light above me. Too bright. Too white. Humming like it was the only thing in the world that hadn't almost stopped working. The second thing I saw was the text message. Your house was sold while you were under anesthesia. Don't even try to come back this time. It was from my sister, Lauren. For a moment, I thought the anesthesia was still messing with my head. 8 hours under. Emergency abdominal surgery. Severe infection. The surgeon had told my parents they couldn't guarantee I'd wake up. And while I was lying on that operating table, cut open and unconscious, my sister had apparently decided to liquidate my life. I stared at the screen again. Don't even try to come back. Not, are you okay? Not, we were scared. Not, you almost died. Just a victory announcement. My heart monitor ticked steadily beside me. Calm and indifferent. I felt anything but calm. I had built that house myself. Not physically, but financially. The penthouse at Harbor Crown Tower overlooking Elliott Bay. I chose the marble. I designed the lighting plan. I negotiated the closing. And according to my sister, it was gone. That wasn't even the part that chilled me. What chilled me was how certain she sounded. I shifted carefully in the hospital bed. Pain slicing through my abdomen like a reminder that I was still very much alive. A nurse stepped in, adjusting my IV. You gave us a scare, she said gently. Your family was asking a lot of questions. What kind of questions? My voice came out thinner than I intended. She hesitated, then lowered her tone. About medical power of attorney. About estate directives. About who inherits what if something happens. Something happens. I closed my eyes. They hadn't just reacted to a crisis. They had prepared for an outcome. And somewhere between the anesthesia and the incision, my sister had decided the house was already hers. I reached for my phone again. Can you grab my bag? I asked the nurse. There's a laptop inside. She gave me a look that said I should be resting. This will only take a minute. She placed the bag on the tray table and helped me sit up. The movement sent fire through my core. But I ignored it. Pain was temporary. What Lauren had just done was permanent. Or at least, it would have been if she were right. I opened my laptop and logged into the Riverline Holdings executive portal. To my family, I was just Jenna Phillips, interior architect, 32, creative, independent, maybe a little too ambitious. To the state of Washington, I was the majority stakeholder and controlling executive of Riverline Holdings, the development firm that owned Harbor Crown Tower, all 45 floors of it. Lauren lived on the 42nd floor. My parents were on 39. I'd arranged family courtesy occupancy when Lauren's boutique failed and my father's consulting income started shrinking. They thought it was generosity. They never asked how I had the authority. I opened the property registry. Unit 4501. Owner, Riverline Holdings, LLC. Managing Executive, Jenna Phillips. Not sold. Not transferred. No pending escrow. I checked again. Slower this time. Still mine. So what had Lauren sold? My phone rang. Lauren... I let it ring twice before answering. What did you do? She demanded immediately. I was going to ask you the same thing. The buyer showed up this morning with movers. The front desk wouldn't let him up. They said the sale wasn't recorded. That's because it wasn't legitimate. There was a pause, then a brittle laugh. You don't get to control everything forever. Jenna, you were unconscious. Mom said we had to act. Act how? You signed power of attorney last year. You just don't remember. I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Not panic. Clarity. I never signed power of attorney. I said evenly. Silence. You're lying, she shot back. No. You are... Her breathing changed. I could hear it. We had a notary. Who... Another pause. You wouldn't know her. Try me. She didn't answer. Instead, she said, it's done. The deposit's been paid. Contracts are drafted. You can't undo it. I looked at my screen again. 45 floors. My name at the top of the executive chain. You sold something you don't own, I said softly. Don't start that again. It's family property. It's corporate property. That's semantics. No, I said. That's felony fraud. She went quiet. In the background, I could hear my mother's voice. What is she saying? Lauren covered the phone. But not well enough. She says we don't own it. My mother's response came faint but sharp. Of course we do. She was under anesthesia. That was it. That was the line. Under anesthesia. As if unconsciousness made me disposable. I clicked over to internal building operations and dialed the front desk directly. This is Jenna Phillips, I said when the concierge answered. Deactivate Lauren Phillips' elevator access card immediately. Also suspend guest access privileges tied to her unit. A beat of stunned silence. Yes. Ms. Phillips. Lauren heard enough. You can't do that, she snapped. I live here. You occupy a courtesy residence under Riverline Holdings. That courtesy has ended. You think you can just throw me out? No, I said calmly. I think I can enforce the law. My sister had believed she'd won while I was unconscious. She had believed a surgical window was an opportunity. She had forgotten one thing. I didn't just own the house she tried to sell. I owned the building she was standing in. By the time I hung up with Lauren, the anesthesia haze had burned off, replaced by something far sharper than pain. I had spent my entire life being underestimated. Growing up in Spokane, I was the quiet one, the serious one, the one who needed to relax. Lauren was magnetic, effortless. She dated quarterbacks and talked our parents into vacations they couldn't afford. When she failed, it was because someone else hadn't supported her enough. When I succeeded, it was because I had pushed too hard. I still remember the day I got into the University of Washington's architecture program on a merit scholarship. I was 19, standing in our kitchen with the acceptance letter shaking in my hands. Dad skimmed it and nodded. That's good. Honey, just don't forget work-life balance. You don't want to intimidate men. Lauren had laughed. Interior design. So you'll pick pillows for rich people. I didn't argue. I didn't explain the structural coursework, the internships, the drafting labs that kept me up until 2 a.m. I learned early that explaining myself to them was like pouring water into a sieve. So I stopped explaining. After graduation, I moved to Seattle with one suitcase and a portfolio. I took a junior position at a boutique firm and worked weekends. I networked quietly. I listened more than I talked. I paid attention to who really controlled capital behind development deals. Most people in my field designed rooms. I studied ownership. 4 years ago, Riverline Holdings was a struggling mid-tier development company with over-leveraged assets and one promising waterfront acquisition. I didn't join as a designer. I bought in. At first, it was a minority stake. Then I leveraged a design contract into equity. Then I negotiated debt restructuring when 2 senior partners panicked. By 30, I controlled 51%. By 32, I controlled everything that mattered. Lauren didn't know any of this. To her, I was the creative sister with a nice condo. When Harbor Crown Tower opened, 45 floors of glass and steel against Elliott Bay, she came to the ribbon cutting wearing a red dress and told everyone she was so proud of Jenna's decorating project. She never asked why the mayor shook my hand first. When her boutique folded after 18 months of bleeding rent, she called me crying. It's temporary, she insisted. I just need somewhere stable for a while. I gave her the 42nd floor at a reduced internal rate through corporate housing allocation. I told my parents they could move into 39 when Dad's consulting revenue dipped. I structured it legally, carefully. Courtesy occupancy agreements. Revocable. Clear. They never read what they signed. They didn't need to. They assumed family meant entitlement. I didn't correct them. Part of me wanted to believe that generosity would build goodwill. Instead, it built expectation. I opened my laptop again and accessed the internal audit logs for Harbor Crown. Lauren's access history populated the screen. 2 months ago, She'd requested a digital copy of the building's master insurance policy for reference. 6 weeks ago, she'd accessed the ownership summary document. 3 weeks ago, she downloaded a template file labeled Emergency Transfer Authorization. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. This wasn't spontaneous. I pulled up the hospital visitor log through the patient portal. My mother had checked in at 6:42 in the morning. Lauren at 7:10. Surgery started at 8. At 9:12, while I was still under anesthesia, there was a call placed from Lauren's number to a private notary service. I zoomed in on the timestamp. 9:12. They hadn't waited for confirmation. They had moved while I was unconscious. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother. "Jenna," she said immediately. Her voice strained. "You're overreacting. We were trying to protect you." "From what?" "From chaos. If something had happened—" "But it didn't." "You don't know that. The doctor said it was serious. And your response was to transfer my assets. It's not just yours," she said sharply. "We're family." There it was. Family. As if that word dissolved contracts. "You ask the hospital about my estate directives," I said quietly. She went still. "That's what nurses do," she said too quickly. "They exaggerate. You asked about medical power of attorney. We were scared." "No," I replied. "You were planning." Silence stretched between us. Then she said, "Lauren said you signed something last year." "I didn't." "She said you don't remember." "I was fully conscious last year." Another pause. My mother's voice softened. "Jenna, you've always kept things from us. We didn't even know how much you were worth. That's because every time I succeeded, you treated it like a family resource. That's not fair. When I bought my first property, Dad asked if I could co-sign Lauren's expansion loan. That was support. It was access." She inhaled sharply. "You sound cruel," she whispered. "No," I said. "I sound clear." After we hung up, I leaned back against the hospital pillows, exhaustion creeping in around the edges. This wasn't just about a forged document. It was about a pattern that stretched back years. They had never seen me as the owner of my life, just the provider. I opened Riverline's executive dashboard and reviewed the shareholder agreement again. Majority equity. Controlling vote. Emergency incapacity clause required certified medical declaration and board review. They didn't have either, but they had tried to manufacture the first. My phone buzzed with a notification from building operations. Lauren's elevator access card. Deactivated. Guest pass privileges. Revoked. Temporary restriction placed on Unit 42 pending compliance review. A few seconds later, a text came through from Lauren. "You humiliated me in front of the concierge." I stared at it. Then I typed back. "You tried to sell my life while I was unconscious." The typing bubble appeared. Disappeared. Reappeared. "You always think you're smarter than everyone." She finally sent. I set the phone down without responding. This wasn't about being smarter. It was about being prepared. And they had made one fatal mistake. They thought I built pretty rooms. They forgot I built systems. And systems don't collapse because someone panics. They collapse because someone owns them. And I did. The buyer came back that afternoon. I was still in the hospital when my phone buzzed with a call from the Harbor Crown front desk. "Ms. Phillips." "Daniel," the concierge said carefully. "There's a gentleman here insisting he purchased Unit 4501. He has partial documentation. Send me a photo of whatever he's holding," I said. A moment later, a scanned image appeared in my inbox. It was a transfer agreement. My name typed beneath a signature that wasn't mine. The document header used an outdated Riverline logo we'd retired 3 years ago. Sloppy, but not amateur. "Is he alone?" I asked. "Yes. Ma'am, he has movers waiting outside. Do not allow them access beyond the lobby. Tell him corporate review is pending." "Yes. Ma'am." I hung up and enlarged the document. The notary seal was embossed digitally, not stamped. The registration number looked real, but the formatting was off by 1 digit. I pulled up the Washington State Notary Registry and typed it in. Invalid. I felt my pulse steady. Not Spike. Fraud was emotional. Proof was mechanical. My phone rang again. Lauren. They're refusing to let him upstairs, she said before I could speak. This is ridiculous. You forged a transfer agreement. It's not forged. We had it notarized. By whom? She hesitated just long enough. You don't know everyone I know. I know enough. You can't just undo a sale because you woke up in a bad mood. I can undo a sale that never legally existed. You're being dramatic. No, I said evenly. You are. She exhaled sharply. He already wired the deposit. To whom? Silence. To Dad's account, she admitted finally. I closed my eyes. How much? It doesn't matter. It does to the federal government. Her breathing shifted. You wouldn't. You sold property owned by a corporation without authorization. It's family property. It's a commercial asset under a holding company. You hide behind paperwork. I built the paperwork. She laughed. But it sounded brittle. You really think you're untouchable? Don't you? No, I said quietly. I think I'm documented. There was shouting in the background. My father's voice this time. Put her on speaker. A rustling sound. Then Dad came through. Jenna. Let's lower the temperature. I'm calm. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. You attempted to transfer corporate property. We were protecting the family. From what? From uncertainty, he snapped. You don't share anything with us. We didn't even know the full value of your assets. That's not a justification. It is when you could have died. I swallowed. So you prepared to inherit me while I was still alive. Silence. Lauren jumped back in. That's not what this is. Then what is it? You always act like we're the villains, she said. Like we're parasites. I gave you housing. We didn't ask for charity. You asked for stability. You made us feel small, she shot back. You always have. I let that hang. This wasn't about real estate. This was about hierarchy. They were comfortable when I was the younger sister chasing internships. They were not comfortable when I became the controlling stakeholder of a 45-story tower. My laptop pinged. An internal security alert. Unauthorized document submission detected in escrow portal. I opened it immediately. Lauren had attempted to upload the forged transfer agreement directly into Riverline's transaction system. She was trying to legitimize it retroactively. My stomach tightened. Did you just submit paperwork into my corporate portal? I asked. You can't prove that. I can see the IP address. Silence. Then she said, softer. We're in this now. Jenna. Yes. They were. I forwarded the document and IP log to Riverline's legal counsel with one line. Initiate internal fraud review. Then I called Daniel back. Inform the buyer that the transfer agreement is fraudulent and under investigation. If he wishes to pursue recourse, he may contact corporate counsel. Yes, ma'am. And Daniel, yes. Document everything. I hung up and leaned back. The hospital ceiling swimming slightly above me. The buyer wasn't the real problem. The real problem was how quickly Lauren escalated. She hadn't just texted a threat. She had executed steps. Notary. Deposit. Escrow upload. While I was under anesthesia, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't family. It was Ethan Brooks. Riverline's operations director? Jenna. We have an issue. What kind? Someone claiming to represent you contacted 2 of our minority investors this morning. My vision sharpened. What did they say? That you're medically incapacitated and the family is stepping in to stabilize assets. The room seemed to shrink. Who signed the email? Lauren Phillips. Of course she did. She attached the transfer agreement. Ethan continued. One investor already asked whether there's a succession plan. There it was. Not just a house. Not just a floor. Control. If they trigger the emergency incapacity clause, they can't. I cut in. There's no medical declaration. But the rumor alone, I'll handle it. You're in the hospital. I'm conscious. He paused. I'll schedule a board check-in, he said carefully. Tomorrow morning? Do it. After we hung up, I stared at the wall for a long moment. Lauren hadn't just tried to sell my home. She had tried to step into my authority, to present herself as continuity, as if I were already gone. My phone lit up again. A message from the buyer. Unknown number. I've been informed there's an issue with the title transfer. I expect resolution. I typed back. There is no valid title transfer. You were provided fraudulent documentation. I suggest you consult counsel. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Across the city. In a lobby 45 floors below the penthouse she thought she owned. My sister was learning something she had never understood. Ownership is not proximity. Authority is not assumption. And control is not inherited through panic. I opened the shareholder agreement once more and scrolled to the emergency clause. Activation required 2/3 board vote and certified incapacity. She had neither. But she was trying to manufacture both. I closed my laptop slowly. They had underestimated me my entire life. This time, they had underestimated the structure. And structures, when properly built, do not collapse because someone wants them to. They collapse only when the foundation is weak. Mine wasn't, but theirs was starting to crack. By midnight, the morphine had worn off, and so had any illusion that this was a misunderstanding. I opened Riverline's full audit console and authorized a forensic access review on my executive accounts. The timeline populated in cold. Unemotional rouse. 6 weeks ago, Lauren had requested temporary access to a shared digital drive labeled Insurance and Compliance. 4 weeks ago, she downloaded the Harbor Crown Master Blueprint file. 3 weeks ago, she accessed a document template titled Emergency Transfer Authorization. 2 days before my surgery, there were 3 failed login attempts to my personal investment dashboard. And at 9:12 in the morning, while I was still under anesthesia, a new escrow file had been initiated under a shell profile. I stared at the timestamp. 9:12. Surgery had started at 8. They hadn't waited to see if I would survive. They had moved during the window. My stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with stitches. I switched screens and pulled hospital visitor logs through the patient portal. Lauren had checked in at 7:10. She'd left at 10:30. There was an internal Wi-Fi access ping at 9:23 from a guest device attempting to log into my executive email. Attempt denied. My fingers went still on the keyboard. She had tried to access my email from the hospital. While I was unconscious, a knock on my door pulled me back. Doctor? Patel stepped in, reviewing my chart. You shouldn't be working, she said gently. I'm not working, I replied. I'm documenting. She hesitated. I want you to know, she said quietly. Your sister presented paperwork yesterday morning claiming medical authority. The formatting looked off, so we didn't honor it. What paperwork? Power of attorney. It listed her as decision-maker in the event of incapacity. My pulse thudded once. Did she ask about anything specific? Doctor? Patel's expression shifted. She asked whether you had advanced directives tied to property, and whether there were life insurance policies connected to corporate holdings. The room felt smaller. Not panic. Not fear. Recognition. They weren't reacting to crisis. They were calculating succession. Did she ask about my prognosis? I asked. She did, the doctor said carefully. But more in terms of timeline than outcome. Timeline. I nodded once. Thank you for not honoring it. She gave me a long look. You're fortunate we caught the inconsistencies. Fortunate. That wasn't the word I would have used. After she left, I opened Riverline's legal archive and requested immediate verification of the notary's seal used in the forged transfer. Within 15 minutes, compliance flagged it as counterfeit. The registration number belonged to a legitimate notary, but the digital stamp had been altered. I forwarded the report to corporate counsel with a second line. Escalate to state registry. My phone rang before I could close the laptop. Ethan, we have a bigger problem, he said. I'm listening. An email went out to 3 minority shareholders this morning. My jaw tightened. From whom? Lauren. She signed it as family representative. Of course she did. What did it say? That you're medically incapacitated and that interim oversight may be required to protect investor interests. I exhaled slowly. She attached the forged transfer agreement and referenced the emergency incapacity clause. There it was. The next layer. Not just a fraudulent sale. A corporate maneuver. If 2/3 of the board believes you're incapacitated, they don't have medical certification. I cut in. Rumor can be enough to trigger a review vote. My mind shifted into structure mode. Shareholder agreement. Section 12. Emergency oversight activation required written physician certification and majority equity override. I still held 51%. But perception mattered. Schedule an emergency board video call for tomorrow morning, I said. You're still in the hospital. I'm conscious. He hesitated. One investor already asked whether there's a succession plan. Of course they had. Uncertainty is oxygen for opportunists. I'll handle it, I said. After we hung up, I leaned back against the pillows, the IV line tugging faintly at my arm. I had built Riverline on predictability. Lauren was injecting chaos. My laptop chimed again. Legal had traced the escrow account. The Shell LLC used for the deposit had prior filings connected to elder financial exploitation investigations in Oregon. I stared at the note twice. Elder exploitation. This wasn't just fraud. It was patterned fraud. Another message appeared from compliance. Blueprint PDF attached to zoning complaint draft. I froze. What zoning complaint? I whispered. I opened the alert. An anonymous submission had been filed with the Seattle Planning Department, alleging environmental non-compliance in Harbor Crown's waterfront redevelopment phase. Attached documentation included internal blueprint files that were not publicly available. My throat tightened. Only someone with internal access could have retrieved those. I cross-referenced file logs. Lauren's user credentials. Downloaded 3 weeks ago. I felt the weight of it settle fully now. This wasn't panic. This wasn't fear. This was strategy. Escrow fraud. Board interference. Regulatory sabotage. While I was unconscious, my phone vibrated again. Lauren. I answered without greeting. You've gone too far, she said immediately. No, I replied calmly. You have? You're turning this into a federal issue. You involved counterfeit notarization. We were trying to secure stability. You tried to secure control. She inhaled sharply. If you hadn't kept everything so secret. My ownership is public record. You hid behind corporations. I built them. Silence stretched between us. Then she said something that told me everything. The zoning complaint was just leverage. Leverage. Not concern. Not oversight. Leverage. You're admitting that? I asked quietly. You can't prove it. I don't need to. There was movement on her end. A door closing. A muffled voice. You think you're untouchable because you own the building, she said. But people don't like instability. I'm not unstable. You were under anesthesia, and you mistook that for absence. She didn't respond. Instead, she said, softer now, if something had happened to you, what would we have had? There it was, fear wrapped in entitlement. You would have had grief, I said. Not my assets. I ended the call. The ceiling above me hummed quietly, indifferent to inheritance schemes and forged seals. I opened the audit log again and scrolled from top to bottom. Every timestamp, every access point, every attempt. They had prepared. They had assembled documents. They had made calls. They had drafted contingency plans around my possible death. They hadn't just tried to sell my house. They had tried to step into my authority before my heart had even stabilized. I closed the laptop slowly. Revenge would have been emotional. Documentation was structural, and structure always wins over impulse. They thought anesthesia meant vulnerability. They forgot it also meant witnesses. Digital ones. Legal ones. And now, federal ones. This was no longer a family misunderstanding. It was a case file. And I was no longer recovering. I was responding. At 8 in the morning, I adjusted the hospital tray table so the camera wouldn't catch the IV line running into my arm. Ethan had already opened the emergency board session. 6 faces filled my screen. Investors. Directors. People who didn't care about family drama, they cared about stability. Jenna. The board chair said carefully, "We're glad to see you conscious." "Conscious and operational," I replied. I kept my voice steady, measured, not defensive. "We've received communications suggesting you may be medically incapacitated." One of the minority shareholders added, "We need clarification." Of course they did. "I underwent emergency surgery," I said. "I am fully cognitively functional and medically cleared to perform executive duties." A pause. "Do you have documentation?" Another director asked. "Right on cue." "Doctor." Patel stepped into the frame beside me. "I'm Dr. Aisha Patel, attending physician," she said. "Ms. Phillips is not incapacitated. There is no neurological impairment. She is cleared to make legal and executive decisions." Silence followed. On the other end of the call, I saw the shift. Lauren's narrative was unraveling. "I appreciate the clarification," the aggressive minority shareholder said, though his tone held disappointment. "However, we must address the broader concern. There are allegations of asset instability." "Allegations," I repeated calmly. "Based on forged documentation." I shared my screen. The counterfeit transfer agreement appeared first. Then the notary registry report. Then the IP log showing internal portal access from Lauren's credentials. Then the email she had sent to 3 board members claiming interim authority. The room went quiet. "This email," I said evenly, "was sent without corporate authorization. The transfer agreement attached to it is fraudulent. A shell LLC was used to initiate escrow. That LLC is currently under federal investigation." A director leaned closer to her camera. "Federal?" "Yes." The aggressive shareholder cleared his throat. "Family disputes should not jeopardize investor confidence." "This is not a family dispute," I said. "It is an attempted corporate interference." He hesitated. "There was also mention of a zoning complaint filed regarding waterfront compliance." I nodded. "An anonymous submission using internal blueprint documents. Those documents were accessed through credentials belonging to my sister." "You're suggesting sabotage?" someone asked. "I'm stating documented facts." There was a brief flurry of private messages on the screen. I could almost see the calculations happening in real time. If instability exists, the aggressive shareholder pressed. "The emergency oversight clause may still warrant review." There it was. The move. Even without medical incapacity, optics could justify temporary supervision. My pulse steadied. "You are free to review Section 12 of the shareholder agreement," I said. "Activation requires certified incapacity." "There is none. Additionally, I retain majority equity. Any oversight motion would be symbolic and legally void." He didn't like that. "Symbolic instability still impacts stock value." I shifted the conversation. "Now that we've addressed misinformation, I'd like to present an update on the Harbor Crown waterfront expansion." Ethan's eyes flicked toward me on screen. He understood the pivot. I pulled up revised development projections. "We've identified an opportunity to integrate a boutique hospitality component into Phase 2. I continued. "Projected increase in annual yield, 14%. Environmental compliance exceeds state baseline by 22%. The aggressive shareholder blinked. "This wasn't on the last projection," he said. "I finalized the model during recovery," I replied. Murmurs rippled across the call. "When adversity tests leadership," I added calmly, "clarity becomes an advantage." The board chair leaned back. "What would implementation require?" "An additional $23 million in capital allocation." Silence. Then the board chair said, "I move that we table oversight discussion and proceed with evaluation of the expansion proposal." Seconded. The aggressive shareholder hesitated, then withdrew his motion. Vote passed. Leadership reaffirmed in official minutes. The meeting ended 27 minutes later. As the screen went dark, I allowed myself one slow exhale. Ethan's private message popped up. "You just buried it." "Not buried." I typed back. "Documented." My phone rang almost immediately. "Lauren, you humiliated me," she said without greeting. "No," I replied. "You did that yourself. You made me look like a criminal. You forged documents. We were trying to protect the family. By emailing my board and triggering oversight language, you were unconscious. I am not dead." Silence. Then she said, "Lower now. You always have to prove you're smarter. This isn't about intelligence. It's about control." "Yes," I said calmly. "It is." She inhaled sharply. "You think you've won because you own the shares." "I don't think I've won," I replied. "I think I prevented theft." "You're overreacting." I almost laughed. "You filed a zoning complaint." I said. She froze. "You can't prove that." "I don't need to prove motive. I have metadata." Her breathing shifted. "That project is risky," she muttered. "Someone had to raise concerns." "You raised them anonymously using internal documents. You don't understand what it's like not knowing where you stand." I closed my eyes briefly. "I know exactly where I stand," I said. "On 45 floors of legal documentation." There was a long pause. Then, quietly, she said, "You're going to destroy this family." "No," I replied. "You attempted to." I ended the call. A notification from city planning flashed on my screen. Preliminary review scheduled for the zoning complaint. Public record. Media exposure possible. Lauren hadn't just tried to sell my home. She had tried to destabilize my future revenue. I stared at the skyline through the hospital window. Rain streaked down the glass, blurring the shape of Harbor Crown in the distance. They had underestimated something fundamental. Ownership isn't loud. It's layered. Legal structure. Equity. Documentation. Authority. They had relied on assumption. I relied on systems. My phone buzzed once more. A journalist requesting comment regarding leadership instability at Riverline Holdings. It had begun. Not collapse. Exposure. They couldn't take my house. They couldn't take my board. So now they were trying to shake my reputation. I closed my laptop gently. Let them try. Structures don't fail because someone whispers. They fail because someone builds them weak. And I never build weak. The zoning complaint became real at 9:42 the next morning. City planning scheduled a preliminary environmental compliance review for Harbor Crown's waterfront expansion, citing anonymous internal documentation suggesting deviation from approved shoreline mitigation plans. Anonymous. I opened the attached submission. It included excerpts from our structural blueprint package, files that were never publicly released. My chest tightened. Only 3 executive accounts had access to that folder. Meanie. Ethan's. And the temporary credentials Lauren had requested 2 months ago. I pulled the internal file access log again. 3 weeks earlier, Lauren's credentials had downloaded the complete Phase 2 blueprint archive. Timestamped at 11:37 p.m. She hadn't even tried to hide it. I called compliance immediately. "Trace the submission metadata," I said. "It was filed through a prepaid device." They replied. "Registered to a shell name. Match the PDF fingerprint." A pause. "Fingerprint matches the file downloaded from Lauren's access key." There it was. Escrow fraud. Board interference. Now regulatory sabotage. My phone rang before I could process it further. "Jenna Phillips," a calm male voice asked. "Yes. This is Special Agent Daniel Ross with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to schedule a formal interview regarding a counterfeit notary linked to your company's attempted property transfer." I closed my eyes briefly. "Of course. We've identified the shell LLC used for the escrow. It has prior connections to a multi-state elder financial exploitation ring." My throat went dry. Elder exploitation. Yes. The notary ID used in your case has appeared in 2 other investigations. So this isn't isolated. No, ma'am. It suggests coordinated wire fraud. Coordinated. I swallowed. Are you suggesting conspiracy? We're exploring that possibility. He paused. Did your sister benefit financially from the attempted transfer? Yes, I said. Did she knowingly submit fraudulent documentation? Yes. There was silence on the line as he made notes. We may be looking at forgery, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges, he said finally, depending on cooperation. Charges. Years, not weeks. Understood, I replied. After we hung up, I stared at the city beyond the hospital window. This had crossed a line. Not just family betrayal, federal exposure. An hour later, Lauren walked into my hospital room unannounced. Security had tried to stop her, but I told them to let her in. I wanted to see her face. She looked smaller than usual, less polished. You called the FBI, she demanded. I responded to a federal inquiry. You're destroying us. You forged documents. We were scared, she snapped. You could have died. And your response was to activate escrow. We didn't know what would happen to everything. To everything, I repeated. She paced near the window. Dad was terrified, she said. He said if you didn't make it, the company would freeze assets. We'd lose access. Access to what? I asked quietly. Something you didn't build. Her jaw tightened. You never told us how much you had. That's not consent. You think you're better than us because you're successful. No, I said calmly. I think I'm responsible for what I built. She stopped pacing. The zoning complaint was just leverage, she muttered. I felt something settle inside me. So you admit it? She froze. That's not what I meant. You meant pressure. Silence. You were supposed to be out of commission, she said finally. There it was. The assumption, under anesthesia, meant neutralized. I leaned back carefully. I was in surgery. Lauren, not erased. Her eyes flickered. You don't understand what it feels like, she whispered. To know you'd never measure up? This isn't about measuring up, I said. It's about legality. She looked away. You're going to press charges. That depends. On what? On whether you cooperate? She stared at me. You'd really let them send me to prison. I would let consequences exist. Her face went pale. After she left, my legal counsel called. You have options, he said. I'm listening. We can cooperate fully and pursue maximum charges. That would likely result in federal prosecution. And the alternative, provide documentation. But recommend leniency contingent on full cooperation and restitution. Restitution. Accountability without annihilation. Agent Ross indicated potential sentencing exposure could reach double digits if conspiracy is proven. My counsel added, 15 years. I sat with that number. I remembered being 8 years old, watching Lauren blow out candles at her birthday party while I held the camera. I remembered being 16 and hearing my father tell her, "You'll always land on your feet." She had believed that, until now. Freeze the escrow, I said finally. File the fraud report. Submit full documentation to the FBI. And the zoning complaint. Prepare a counter-submission with complete compliance transparency. I want the city to see everything. And your sister? Draft a formal demand letter. For written admission. Withdrawal of the zoning complaint. Cooperation with federal authorities. Repayment of the deposit. Immediate cessation of any representation of corporate authority. And if she refuses? I stared at the IV line taped to my arm. Then I don't intervene. That night, a journalist emailed requesting comment on internal instability at Harbor Crown. The story was spreading. I responded with one sentence. Riverline Holdings is cooperating fully with federal and municipal authorities. There is no leadership instability. Truth, not emotion. An hour later, Agent Ross called again. The Shell LLC operator has agreed to cooperate, he said. He identified an intermediary who connected him to your sister. Who? A financial consultant named Martin Caldwell. My stomach tightened. Caldwell had advised my parents on retirement restructuring 2 years ago. This wasn't spontaneous, I said. No, Agent Ross replied. It appears assembled. After we hung up, I lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. They hadn't panicked. They had strategized. They had recruited help. They had timed it to anesthesia. They hadn't just tried to sell my house. They had attempted to inherit my authority while I was still breathing. I closed my eyes. Revenge would be easy. Documentation was harder. And boundaries were hardest of all. But this was no longer a sister's mistake. It was a federal file, and I was still awake. Martin Caldwell's name sat at the top of the FBI briefing summary when I opened the encrypted file. Independent financial consultant. Licensed. Previously retained by my parents for retirement restructuring. Email records attached. I scrolled slowly. 3 months before my surgery, Caldwell had written to Lauren. In the event of medical incapacity, timing is critical to secure transitional control. Attached was a draft strategy outline. 2 weeks later, my father replied, We need to understand asset positioning before anything happens. Before anything happens. The words felt colder than any accusation. They hadn't reacted to crisis. They had rehearsed for it. I closed the file and stared at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. I had been discharged that morning. Instead of going home, I went straight to Aldercrest's executive conference room. Neutral territory. Glass walls. Long walnut table. No family photos. Lauren arrived first. My parents followed. Caldwell came last. Carrying a leather portfolio like this was still a consultation. No one hugged me. No one asked about my recovery. I placed a printed copy of the email chain in the center of the table without speaking. Lauren's eyes flicked down. My father reached for the papers first. His hands trembled. That's taken out of context, he said immediately. Read the timestamps, I replied. He did. My mother's face drained of color as she scanned the phrase medical window. We were scared, she whispered. You were preparing, I corrected. Lauren lifted her chin. You keep everything locked behind corporations, she said. We didn't know where we stood. You stood in apartments you didn't pay for, I replied evenly. That's not what I mean. I know. Caldwell cleared his throat. I advised contingency planning, he said carefully. It's standard financial prudence. Did you advise counterfeit notarization? I asked. He hesitated. I warned against irregular documentation. But you proceeded. Lauren shot him a look. He looked away. You knew it was criminal, I said. He didn't deny it. My father sank back into his chair. This isn't who we are, he murmured. No, I said softly. It's exactly who you chose to be. My legal counsel entered then, placing a folder beside me. I'll summarize exposure, he said calmly. Forgery, wire fraud, conspiracy, attempted financial exploitation, regulatory interference. Each charge landed heavier than the last. Sentencing guidelines could range into double digits, he added. My mother's breath hitched. Lauren stared straight ahead. Caldwell's jaw tightened. This is excessive, Lauren said finally. It was a family matter. It became federal when you wired funds through a flagged shell LLC, I replied. Silence filled the room. The air felt thin. You could stop this, my father said quietly. I could influence cooperation. I corrected. Lauren leaned forward. You'd really let them send me to prison? I met her eyes. I would let consequences exist. Her bravado flickered. Caldwell shifted in his seat. If cooperation is provided, prosecutorial discretion may apply. I slid a second document across the table. Conditions. Written admission of forgery and conspiracy. Immediate withdrawal of the zoning complaint. Full cooperation with federal investigation. Repayment of escrow funds. Formal retraction to Riverline's board and investors. Permanent removal from any advisory influence over my business. Market rate lease only? No courtesy housing. No special access. I added. Lauren scanned the list. This is humiliation, she whispered. This is accountability. My mother began to cry quietly. My father closed his eyes. Caldwell looked at the door as if calculating escape. If these terms are rejected, I said calmly, I will not intervene with federal prosecution. The room went very still. I stood. You have 48 hours. They left without arguing further. 48 hours passed slower than the surgery recovery. I returned to my office for the first time since the hospital. 45 floors up. The city stretched below like a reminder of scale. Lauren arrived alone that afternoon. She looked different, less polished, less certain. You always had to prove you were better, she said quietly. No, I replied. I had to prove I wasn't disposable. She flinched. We thought if you didn't wake up, she began. You'd divide assets before my heart stabilized. She swallowed. You've always controlled everything. Control is not abandonment. She stared at the skyline through the glass. You don't know what it feels like to live in someone else's shadow. I built this building from the ground up, I said softly. I didn't inherit it. She was silent. Then, almost inaudibly, she asked, would you really let them put me in prison? I didn't look away. I would let the system work. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. I'll sign, she said. The signed admission arrived the next morning. So did my parents' acknowledgement. Caldwell agreed to surrender his license and cooperate with investigators regarding the Shell LLC network. Agent Ross confirmed federal prosecutors were considering reduced charges contingent on testimony. Accountability without annihilation. The zoning complaint was formally withdrawn. A public retraction was sent to Riverline's board. Investor confidence steadied. That night, I stood alone in my office. The city lights flickering below. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Revenge would have been loud. This was quieter. Harder. They had not tried to steal just a property. They had tried to step into my place. To inherit authority through assumption. To treat my unconscious body as an opening. They forgot something. Structures don't collapse because someone wants control. They collapse when the owner surrenders it. I never did. And for the first time since surgery, I realized something else. I hadn't won. I had simply refused to disappear. The hearing room at Seattle Planning was smaller than I expected. Fluorescent lights. Gray carpet. A long table facing 3 city officials who looked more tired than hostile. I took my seat calmly. No dramatic entrance. No entourage. Just documentation. The anonymous zoning complaint was projected on a screen behind them. Sections highlighted in yellow. Environmental noncompliance. Shoreline deviation. Structural misrepresentation. One of the officials adjusted his glasses. Ms. Phillips. Our review confirms that the documentation submitted with this complaint contained internal blueprint files not available to the public. Yes, I said. Those files appear to have been altered. Yes. And our independent environmental audit shows Harbor Crown's waterfront expansion exceeds state compliance requirements. Yes. He nodded once. Based on our findings, the complaint is dismissed. Just like that. No fireworks. No applause. Dismissed. The word felt heavier than victory. Outside, reporters waited near the entrance. But there were no flashing cameras. No shouting questions. The story had lost its fuel once facts replaced speculation. Riverline Holdings released a short statement that afternoon. Full compliance confirmed. Project proceeding as scheduled. The board sent a follow-up memo reaffirming leadership continuity. Stability restored. Later that evening, Agent Ross called. The Shell LLC operator is cooperating fully, he said. Your sister provided a signed admission and agreed to testify regarding the intermediary. And Caldwell, license surrendered. He's cooperating as well. And charges. Prosecutors are considering reduced sentencing recommendations contingent on continued cooperation. Reduced. Not erased. Consequences. not annihilation. I thanked him and ended the call. 2 days later, my parents signed market-rate lease agreements for their unit on the 39th floor. No courtesy housing? No internal discount. Lauren moved into a smaller apartment on the 26th floor. Same building. Different status. She found administrative work at a small logistics firm downtown. Not glamorous. Not catastrophic. Earned. The first rent payment cleared without issue. That mattered more than any apology speech. My mother asked to see me alone the following week. She stood in my office, hands clasped tightly. "I didn't raise you to be enemies," she said softly. "No," I replied. "You raised us to compete." She winced. "We were afraid of being left behind." "You weren't left behind," I said. "You were invited in." She nodded slowly. "We confused support with access." "Yes." Silence filled the space between us. "I'm sorry," she said. This time, it didn't sound defensive. It sounded small. "I accept that," I replied. "But I didn't say it erased anything." Forgiveness doesn't remove memory. It sets parameters. That evening, I took the elevator to the top, 45 floors up. The terrace doors opened, and the wind coming off Elliott Bay hit my face. Cool and sharp. Seattle stretched in every direction, lights reflecting off water like scattered glass. This building had almost become a symbol of something ugly. Now it was simply what it had always been. Mine. Not because I said so. Because I built it. The elevator chimed behind me. Lauren stepped out. She didn't approach immediately. We stood there in silence for a few seconds. The city humming below. "I didn't think you'd fight this hard," she said quietly. "I didn't think you'd push this far," I replied. She nodded once. "No one ever told me you were scared," she said. "No one ever asked." I answered. Another pause. "I'm not asking for things to go back," she said. "They won't." I know. That was enough. No embrace. No dramatic reconciliation. Just acknowledgement. She stepped aside as I walked back inside. For the first time, it didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. I was simply standing on ground I owned. In the weeks that followed, Harbor Crown's waterfront expansion broke ground on schedule. Investors stabilized. Media attention faded. Life returned to rhythm. But something inside me had shifted permanently. I used to believe strength meant absorbing everything quietly, taking care of everyone, being the dependable one. Now I understood something deeper. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are protection. If you've ever been told you were too ambitious, if you've ever been treated like the family bank account, if someone waited for you to stumble so they could step into your place, remember this. Your success is not a communal asset. Your boundaries are not betrayal. They are the structure that keeps your life from collapsing under someone else's entitlement. I didn't win because I owned 45 floors. I won because I refused to disappear while I was still breathing. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to draw a line with someone who thought they were entitled to your work or your success? Share your experience in the comments. Your stories matter more than you know. And if you believe strength isn't loud but steady, stay with this channel. There are more stories about people who turned betrayal into clarity and chaos into control. Subscribe if you'd like to hear them. I'm still here. And this time, I'm standing alone on every floor. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.